For those of you who don't know me, I'm Tony Marino. I'm the town manager here in Ipswich. Alicia asked me just to step in and welcome everybody. I want to thank everybody for coming. From the town's perspective, we're really excited about this project, not only with the coastal bank stabilization that Alicia's working on along with IRWA, but we're also excited about the project we've got going on with the trustees in Argilla Road. Both of these grants were awarded last year. We've got another application in this year for a new grant with ICAM, so we're hoping to get that as well. So, from the town's perspective, this is great. Onward and upward, we're moving forward in the right direction, and hopefully we get some more grants as we keep these projects going and get everything designed. So I want to thank everyone for coming, and now I'm going to, I think, pass it off to Alicia. All right. Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'll be down the hall.
So thank you all for coming tonight. I really appreciate coming out. So tonight I'm Alicia Gale, and I'm the former conservation agent here in town. This has been my baby for 2 out of the last 3 years. Also tonight is Frank Ventimigliac, who's been on my team, awesome guy, but he's also the team leader for the other grant, the Argilla Road grant. Also tonight speaking will be Kristen Grubbs with Ipswich River Watershed Association and Tom O'Shea with the trustees. There's also, we have some technical support here tonight, Jen Rellstab with Horsley Witten Group, Kevin McHugh with Conoco Engineers and Scientists. They're the engineering two consultants that are working on the Ipswich River grant. And then Ted Wickwire and
Couldn't make it. Marlon and her place.
okay, and they're the consultants for the Argilla Road grant. And then finally, best for last, Catherine Glenn with Coastal Zone Management. It was through their generous funding that we were able to do these two projects. Tonight we're going to have a brief discussion about the impacts from climate change and sea level rise on critical public infrastructure and private property here in Ipswich. We're going to give you some information on how protecting natural resources helps protect the public and why we focus on green infrastructure as opposed to hard solutions like seawalls and revetments. And we're going to talk about some steps the town has taken to address future climate impacts. We're going to give some information on what property owners can do to increase resiliency of your properties during storm events. Then we're going to talk about the Ipswich Riverbank Resiliency Project, where we're looking to repair eroded riverbank, coastal bank where it's still tidal, using nature-based green infrastructure, and also to improve stormwater management right on this property where the county street and the Shercliff Riverwalk are. And then we'll talk about the Argilla Road Flood Mitigation Project, which plans to elevate the road and enlarge a culvert and restore salt marsh. And we'll stop for questions. Feel free to ask questions whenever you want, but we will definitely have a question time at the end of those two discussions about the two grants. So that I will kick it off and turn it over to Tom.
Great. Thank you, Alicia. I'm Tom O'Shea, again, Director of Coast and Natural Resources for the trustees. And the trustees, just so everybody knows and why, in part I've been asked to give some background on really how are we responding to climate change on the coast, and also why would we use green infrastructure or nature-based solutions. One is we have many properties that are seeing a lot of the impacts from these changes, and bigger storms, right? More intense storms with more rainfall. So there's more energy in these storms, and more energy often means more erosion and more impact. And I think as coastal residents, you know this, and probably maybe are seeing this. So that is a big thing, and it's driven in part by warmer weather, which is driving more energy in the system, and this atmosphere is holding more moisture. And so that is something we're going to see more of. And that's already been documented. And then the other is sea level rise, which you've heard about, I'm sure, and even seen yourself. And in the Argilla Road example, we're now seeing it flood the road at least 3 times a month, where that might not have been the case. Peter Pincier, our director of the Crane Estate property, probably has seen these changes over time, and it's now projected to be even more so, which we'll get into later. If you look at these examples, Ipswich in particular is vulnerable to northeasterly storms, right? Extratropical storms that happen usually in the fall through the early spring. And you can see these different places like the Town Wharf, Water Street, that's Jeffreys Neck Road, and then Argilla Road here. The Argilla Road one is very interesting because this is what they call sunny day flooding. It was after post-storm, not necessarily a northeaster, but this is the kind of flooding that will likely, all of this type of flooding is actually going to likely become more of the norm than the exception over time. And then what we really want to, and I think Ipswich in many ways can benefit from, is that you already have these great coastal natural areas that actually do provide some protection from storm impact. The barrier beaches and dunes like at Crane Beach actually provide protection, storm protection. Many of our beaches do. And dune systems, as well as natural areas like tidal flats and marshes. And what they do essentially is help to really lessen the energy, weaken the energy from the storms, and softens that impact to any of the property or places behind those natural coastal areas. So sometimes we may be looking at the focus of the infrastructure or the roads or the property, but actually need to think holistically at the whole coastal natural areas. And then in particular, I mentioned that they do soften that energy impact from storms and storm surges and waves, but the plants actually help to keep soil intact, which is a really important piece, that rather than necessarily thinking about using hard structures, if you actually think about the role of vegetation in holding and keeping things in place, it's pretty powerful. And there's some examples here of coastal resource areas that do provide some protection, but in the case of beaches, you see in coastal banks, it's important that sometimes there's vegetation and ability to hold that those sediment and that resource in place. And then sometimes you'll see, well, we can have hard structures, and that's good at resisting the energy from storms and flooding. However, it often directs the energy of waves somewhere else, causing further erosion. So this is a case where Alicia had shown me in the riverbank here, where between a revetment and a seawall, she's seeing this double scouring from energy that deflects off these hard structures into that area of the bank, causing more erosion. So this is again why vegetation in particular can help be an alternative to these hard structures of kind of holding banks and shorelines more in place over time. So why green infrastructure? It's a term that's used instead of using hard infrastructure, and Catherine Glenn and others are expert at this in Woods Hole Group. But just so you all know that from a trustee's perspective, we want to start to use these and incorporate these on our properties, because I think it's a great way to show how nature can actually help not only protect our shoreline and our properties, but actually it provides other benefits, and in particular wildlife habitat or water filtration, flood control as we've mentioned, and many other things, temperature moderation in the case of things like trees in our cities. So this is going to be more and more what you may hear about green infrastructure, nature-based solutions. And I think that one thing that you might want to think about is that vegetated areas, natural areas tend to regenerate, so they heal themselves. Whereas a lot of hard structures, when they break, you have to fix them. Not that you don't have to maintain natural areas, but they tend to have an ability naturally to mimic nature and to change and be more dynamic and heal themselves. So that's another great benefit of these types of solutions. Is that it? Great. All right, so Kristen?
All right, thanks. Here, there again. Hi, everybody. Kristen Grubbs with the Ipswich River Watershed Association. I think I might know everybody in the room, which is awesome. Thank you. Not quite everybody. I have some new faces tonight. So I'm just going to go through a little bit of how we got here, and I've been asked to speak a little bit about what the town's been working on, which I have some history of, but it's now been 4.5 years since I actually worked in town hall, so there are a lot of other folks in the room who have more direct experience on some of these projects I'll be talking about. This one in particular, I think most of us know about. It's about 1.5 years ago, we finished the Great Marsh Plan. That was a 2-year planning project with the National Wildlife Federation, the Ipswich River Watershed Association, and then the 6 towns that border the Great Marsh: Salisbury, Newburyport, Newbury, Raleigh, Ipswich, and Essex. So we really tried to look at the resource of the Great Marsh as a natural system, like Tom was saying. How do we protect this natural system, which does such a great job of protecting us? The 2 particular projects we're working on tonight were identified through this planning process. We did some in-depth inundation modeling with Woods Hole Group as a part of this project. and that really pointed the initial, I think there was a lot of local understanding that these areas were vulnerable, but I would say that project really gave us some data and some specific community support for taking the next steps to try to address some of these problems. So this plan was an important part that led us to today. In addition, and I'll let Tom just hop up again, but the trustees did a review of all of their coastal properties, and Ipswich in particular rose to the top of that assessment. Do you want to answer questions later, or do you want to say a couple words now, Tom?
Yeah, we're good.
Yeah.
So I guess just generally, they looked at, I think it was 70 properties they have on the coast. Like Kristen said, they had a model to model like future storms going out to 2070. And what came back was that Argilla Road was their most vulnerable asset on any of their properties. And then they approached the town to try to team up. And which is why we are here. We did team up with them and submitted the grant to take this, what you'll see later for Argilla Road, to a 30% design and try to analyze some of the real on-the-ground effects of the sea level rise and all that. So, and we'll talk more about that later.
Great, thanks. So other town planning and implementation projects that have been moving forward, just in particular planning efforts, the Municipal Vulnerability Program that's was Governor Baker's initiative, and I think many of you were part of that workshop that Ipswich held in February. That report has been finalized and has been submitted to the state, so I think the town is waiting to get the official yes, you are certified as an MVP community, but as soon as that certification happens, the town's eligible for additional funding, again, to actually do projects that were identified in that. And I should say, we know there'll be a new round of funding coming out this summer for implementation projects, so I think all of us in the room are trying to help the town move forward to continue to, keep taking the next step on different projects, not just the two tonight, but maybe some other ones.
Kristen?
Yes.
Do you know if Speaker DeLeo's new $1 billion proposal over the next 10 years, which certainly includes, both renewable energy, sustainability issues, and a bunch of these issues. Have you read the content of the bill to see, is it going to go through the MVP program? Is it going to be separate,
I'm not exactly sure that it's been worked out, but it is going to, in theory, support these coastal resiliency projects and more of them along the coast. That I know, but how it's going to get
I don't know.
actually administered, I'm not sure yet.
Because we just agreed to be a green community, I'm sure. Hate it if they were available.
Well, the idea is, I think, to have all the communities in MVP, right? At some point, so.
Yeah. And I think more than 2/3
Are
already, so it's great. And I would say, when you look at the map, our Essex County has really stepped up. Almost all the towns in Essex County are MVP at this point, which is great. Now they're working westward. So I don't know a lot about that, but there's a lot of activity in Boston around these issues right now, and I think they're really trying to figure out how all these different funding sources work together. Does anyone else have an answer to add? Okay. The hazard mitigation plan, Ipswich completed its 5-year update for that last winter, and I think that has also been approved by the state. The Regional Planning Commission was the consultant with the town on that project. The Sustainability Committee, many of you are on. Some of you.
The Sustainability Committee was put together to initially work on becoming a green community, which opens the town up to additional grant funding for sustainable energy projects. And once that green community initiative is achieved, that committee will look at implementing some of these projects, on a energy savings aspect for the town. But that will be more talked about in the coming months, if you haven't already heard. There's been discussed at select board meetings, trying to get the energy rate that needs to be adopted addressed, and some other issues that they need to approve, certain like vehicle purchase plans, so we're buying energy efficient vehicles, and things of that nature. So you will be hearing more of that in the coming months for sure.
And I think I would just comment, as a nonprofit that works with lots of different communities, I think every town is kind of trying to grapple with these topics and areas of initiative and funding opportunities in different ways. But I do think this is, from my perspective, this is a good way to go, is to try to have a central sort of citizen base with municipal staff support clearinghouse to sort of wrap your arms around all of this, because it's a lot. Managing grants and moving projects forward take a lot of town resources and staff time, and it's really helpful to have a committee that can help sort of see the big picture and keep moving things forward on a lot of different levels. And then finally, the community development plan update is also underway. The website is there, and I talked to Ethan Parsons, the town planner, tonight, who was sorry he couldn't be here, but wanted to just reiterate that these efforts are also going to make their way. I think climate resiliency is no longer a little appendix to a community development plan. It's integrated throughout all of the goals and, plans that towns have. So it's.
Do you know if the survey is still open? I know there was a survey, they were trying to get folks to log on.
I believe it is.
All right, so
yes, we're getting on.
please participate in the survey and make your voice heard.
And I think the next public workshop is in September, so there'll be some work over the summer to gather those survey results, and then there'll be another opportunity for the public. Before we dive into sort of the more technical aspects of the project, I think we just want to take 5 minutes to talk about different things that all of us can do. And again, I think many of us know this, but encourage our neighbors, have conversations with our community group. So giving plants a chance, in particular the riverbank project, we were looking at erosion along the bank, and one of the sources of some of that erosion was dragging boats down the bank to access for canoeing. Walking down to the river, we know that the riverbank path gets a lot of foot traffic, which is great, that's what it's there for. It also gets a lot of dog traffic. Having dogs continually running down the slope doesn't really give plants a chance to grow and have their roots try to help stop erosion along the bank. We also identify, and again, you'll hear more about this with the riverbank project, but anywhere there's a slope down to the river, and we know that these heavy rain events, heavy precipitation storms are increasing. We're going to see, in some cases, we'll see longer dry spells, but also simultaneous to that, we'll see heavy, strong storms, and I think we're supposed to get one tonight from what I heard. So we'll see, but we looked at, how does rain travel across the land? Rain falls to the ground, it's called stormwater when it starts moving across the surfaces of the land. How do we help that rain soak into ground and not sort of enhance the problem of erosion, in particular that our riverbanks have?
It's not just erosion, it's also just the loss of water. So a lot of water for a hilly community washes down streets and picks up dog feces and automobile contamination and everything, and then goes through the storm drains and goes down into the marshes. So trying to keep the water on the land seems like a huge deal, but I don't think we are doing much about it.
I think your point is great. It's not just cleaning the water, which is what plants can help with, but it's keeping the water infiltrating into the ground. So it is absolutely both a water quality and a water quantity
And slowing it
concern.
Through the cycle.
Yep, and with so many paved surfaces, but even lawn, even dirt, the water can travel across the ground. So again, these points aren't new, but even though we all know about dogs, I was at a workshop last week And the town did a little math problem. How many dog permits are to come out of the town clerk's office? Times your average 40-pound dog produces 7.8 billion fecal coliform bacteria per day, and then did the math for the whole year. So in one community, I don't know how many dog permits there were, but the image that was on the screen was a bunch of very large elephants, and that was the amount in mass of fecal coliform that community was producing from dog waste. So it's a joke. We joke about it, but it's not a joke. It's a very serious issue, and stormwater pollution is the #1 source of pollution to our rivers and streams and water bodies. And particularly in an estuary community like Ipswich, this is really important.
Thanks, Kristen. All right, so I'm going to talk about the Ipswich Riverbank Resiliency Project. Those of you who've been following us along on our journey may remember that back in fiscal year 17, we received a grant to study a 1-mile section of the Ipswich River from Town Landing down here up to the EBSCO Dam. We identified 6 areas that we were concerned with in terms of erosion, and then we focused on 2 areas, called Area 4, which is at County Street and the Surecliff Riverwalk, and then also Area 1B, which is at the base of Summer Street. And we took those forward to 30% design. And then for this round of grants, we focused just on Area 4, which seemed to be the most time sensitive, shall we say? Sure. There was a stormwater culvert that was failing, and it was leading to erosion of the coastal bank. There was also serious undercutting. I don't think the plant community was strong enough there to hold the roots in place. And then there was also a little bit of erosion from people walking up and down the bank to get access to the river. So Area 4 is what we focused on this round for the grant, getting it all the way through final plans and getting all the environmental permits submitted. Thank you. So it's divided into 2 phases. 2A is the stormwater improvements. And that's what Kevin McHugh at Conoco has designed. We're improving stormwater management from County Street. We're repairing or replacing culverts and catch basins, and we're adding head walls. We're putting up a little bit of curbing to direct stormwater on County Street to the catch basin, where now it's going to be a deep sump catch basin to provide some treatment. It's a very large watershed that comes into that stormwater drain that comes out of this pipe right here. And so there's also a velocity reduction inline, and then also at the end of the pipe, there's going to be some riprap, some stones to sort of, again, slow the water down before it goes into the river. And then, I don't know, you really can't tell very well, but over in here, it's like a cave. It's gotten eroded so bad back in there, and we'll be dealing with that erosion on phase 2B. We're also going to be regrading the Riverwalk to direct stormwater away from the river, because right now we were seeing that stormwater was coming across the field and down those old timber steps and then onto the Riverwalk and then straight down, and that was also causing some erosion. So we're going to be trying to soak that rain in, like Kristen was talking about, slow the flow. We're also going to be replacing those timber steps, which are hard to walk on. They're quite a hazard. It's gotten so bad that people walk down either side, and so now there's no vegetation on either side of the steps, which again encourages stormwater to move very quickly. So we're going to replace those steps with infiltration steps. So if you can imagine a U-shaped timber structure that's filled with small rocks, and then the stormwater can infiltrate into that, and then we'll revegetate the sides. So this is, to orient you, this is County Street, the river's right here. This is where that culvert was coming out. We're gonna replace that culvert, add those head walls and the stone stilling basin in here. And then there's another existing outfall here that doesn't have a head wall and really needs one to meet current standards. So we're gonna be building that in and then just doing some maintenance to that one. And then here's where we're going to be regrading, just very subtle regrading, just to tip the sidewalk, the river walk away from the river. And then here's again where those infiltration steps will be. And then once that, the curbing will be along here. And then once that project is done, We're going to move on to phase 2B, which is the riverbank stabilization. That's what General Sapp's company has designed for us. They're specialists doing this kind of nature-based green infrastructure. So they're going to remove most of the trees on this riverbank are Norway maple, which is a non-native invasive tree. We can't remove them all, but we can selectively remove them and do some pruning to try to let more light in so we can bring in some native vegetation. We're also going to repair that pipe that was coming out, that was all eroded, is over here. So we'll fill in all of that with clean soil, and then we'll protect the Tobe slope with coconut fiber logs or quar logs. And then Horsley Witness put together a really great native planting plan for both this eroded area here and then even down into the tidal flats. Then we're going to revegetate that informal path that was down. So here's Horsley Witten's plan. This is County Street, here's the river, this was the stormwater that we were talking about before. This is going to be the living shoreline, which is using plants again to help protect the toe of the coastal bank here, and these are those coconut fiber logs, and there'll be a shallow swale for the stormwater to direct it right down to the low water mark. As I mentioned, there's going to be pruning some of the larger Norway maples, removing some of the smaller species and some other invasives. There's a lot of non-native invasives in that area. And we're going to plant some native trees that you do find growing in this area, so they should do well, like box elder and red maple. And then again, here's that informal path that we're going to revegetate. If you came to this meeting last time or you read the article that was in the Chronicle after the first meeting, you'll know that we've discovered this plant called seaside brookweed, which is not a rare plant in Massachusetts. It is in New Hampshire, but it is a representative of a very unique habitat, a plant community, I should say. It's a freshwater plant that likes to be in slightly salty water. And so we're going to be making sure that if we need to remove areas of that, we'll be saving those plants and then putting them back. Once you know what it looks like, it's kind of a rosette-shaped plant. Anywhere you look in the intertidal zone, you'll see it. I know probably from the Green Street Bridge to the County Street Bridge, I saw it in multiple locations. So it's definitely not rare, but it's something that we want to protect. Other areas of concern, this is area of concern 1B, that other area that we had looked into a little bit more in depth in our first grant. And DPW is going to be working with Conoco to come up with some solution to better manage stormwater, which sometimes comes ripping down Summer Street and might miss the catch basins and then runs right down here, and it's causing some serious erosion. And that'll be going through conservation. The Conservation Commission will be reviewing that, so there'll be notices in the paper and abutters will be notified. And is there a question?
I'm just wondering if you did an analysis about where the water is coming from. You know, I mean, this is very downstream where you actually have a problem, but has anybody done an analysis about trying to hold the water upland so we have less stormwater?
That's a good question.
I don't know that we've looked upstream to hold it back, but a lot of the problem is that at that location, if you've been down there, there's a tidal gate valve in there that doesn't function properly.
No, I understand that once you get all the water rushing down there and down the storm drains, it's a problem.
So we haven't looked at places where we can infiltrate it upstream now, but we've evaluated what we have for runoff coming down. And we believe there are treatment systems in that intersection, but again, the ocean is backing into the system, even with that gate valve. So at a high tide and a rain event, your system and discharge is blocked with ocean water, and it's not getting out. And that's what's leading mostly to that is actually surface runoff. So again, we're looking at upgrading that tide gate to a more functioning tide gate.
I understand.
And I understand what you're saying.
I think your point would be a really good thing to take to the sustainability committee, because that sort of holistic approach of,
And we can look into that further at DPW as well, but that's not something that is part of what we do today. And I'll make a note and we'll look into that.
Alicia, I have a question about the timelines.
Yes, sir.
You indicated that we're going to do this, we're going to do that, we're going to do this. When are we going to do this?
So this project that we were talking about, that one, the phase 2A and 2B, right now, there's all kinds of permits that you need to get, environmental permits. We have our MIPA certificate, we have our order of conditions, and then there's 2 more permits we have to apply for. One is relatively easy, Jen, the Army Corps. It's you submit your application, and within like 30 to 60 days you get your permit. The last one we need is Chapter 91. Are you familiar with the Chapter 91? It's a public access law, and it's handled by DEP in Boston. And because of so many projects and not enough analysts, it sometimes takes up to 9 months to a year to get that Chapter 91 permit. So we can't start until we have all of the permits. So we actually didn't apply for a grant to do the construction of this for the next fiscal year, because we're not going to have all of our permits yet. The plan is, as soon as we have all of our permits, then the next round of grant funding we'll put in for. And so hopefully it'll be 2021. So this time, a year from now, we will be the town will be putting together their grant application for actual, shovels boots on the ground, shovel ready project.
Provided we have that Chapter 91 license.
Yes, which hopefully we will.
Yeah, hopefully we will.
Yes?
You show the eroded footpath, and people or dogs just made it on their own. Is that what that is?
I think so. It looks like, and it may be, there's a little bit of stormwater also, it's kind of a low spot, so it could have been a little bit of vegetation got damaged from the stormwater, and then people say, hey, this is a good place to walk down. And
So do you think if you revegetate that, people will want to walk down, or they'll
hopefully not. Hopefully people will find, and especially where we will have revegetated this whole area, we really would like to not encourage people to be walking on those plants that we've just put in, so we can have a chance for this area to really restabilize. There are other places. I know it's not as convenient for some, but I showed in one of the pictures across the street from the police station at Sawmill Point. There's the granite steps that get down to the water, so there's that spot. If you continue on the Riverwalk a little further, kind of close to where it turns to head towards Green Street, there's a place, it's also an area that we identified area concern 3, that there's a lot of erosion, but it's like from me to Frank. And it's maybe this wide, and so, hopefully eventually the town will be able to reposition some boulders in that eroded slot, and then there'll be a nice way to step down. Kind of where that sandbar beach is.
Yeah.
Do you know that there? So there's a place that hopefully will be another easier access place. And the town is also looking as part of the restoration, stabilization of that at the end of Summer Street on Water Street. They're going to see if they can incorporate some steps, as part of the head wall for the culvert, so that people can get right down without having to walk on any plants. Because the area right below that culvert is just stone. So if you could get over to that, then you'd be able to walk down. So the town is definitely, and Beth O'Connor with the Open Space program, she's also been working really closely with the Waterways Committee to look into improved public access. So it's definitely something that the town feels strongly about.
Good, thank you. Carolyn?
You don't have to answer this if you don't want to, but I noticed the project at 27 Water Street now has a total hardscape under construction. And the last I heard that the Chapter 91 public access was proposed to be at low tide across the mudflat, which I would think is exactly what you wouldn't want to have happen. So I'm just wondering how that comports with this, and if you're not up on it.
That project, 27 Water Street, does have an order of conditions. They do have a chapter. Actually, I don't even know if they have a Chapter 91. They're not supposed to be working on it until they have a Chapter 91 permit, and I hadn't been following that myself. Bill DC, the field inspector, had been following along with that. If I remember right, there are requirements in the order of conditions requiring them to work around low tide. They're not supposed to be working when the tide is in. But if you do have concerns,
Well, I'm just more interested because it seems to be doing exactly what
well,
you're trying not to do.
they have, there's already a seawall there, and so my understanding is they're replacing what was already there. In an ideal world, we would replace seawalls with vegetated slopes. But if what people have, or they have those, people tend to want to keep them, and especially with a lot that small, they would, obviously.
Yes, I don't know if there's room because it's a vertical drop.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because of the room, there's probably a tough, soft solution there with
Yeah.
the vertical drop. When the wall is probably at, I know high tide is pretty high, but to get to that low tide, you'd be going way out into the river to make a soft solution.
And I know,
And
do
you'll
know.
see some of that with what,
Yeah.
if you can think about how when I show you our road, if you could imagine what I'm explaining then to what the wall would have to look like
Sure.
to achieve it.
And I do remember back from when that property was going through permitting, there was a concerted effort by the Conservation Commission to, as much as they could, reduce the amount of impervious surface and provide for some vegetated areas. It will, my understanding is that what will be vegetated there'll be more vegetated area than there was when it was a boatyard. That's not saying a lot because there was nothing before, and there'll be just a small bit, but,
Good.
all right. There was another question?
I had a question.
Yes.
I take it, I'm now looking at next steps. Is there any town money into this project at all, or is this all totally dependent on grants?
There's a 25% match that the town provides. Most of that has been in kind, my labor, Frank's labor, Beth's labor. But this year, we got an extra $10,000 to do a little bit more work than stormwater than we thought we were going to need to. And the DPW was very generous, and they was $3,000, $3,400. So there is, the town definitely has skin in the game.
In terms of the culvert down on, because I live on Summer Street, I live at the water in summer.
Yep.
And the project, that's a DPW project, isn't it?
Yep.
We've identified it through our phase 1.
Yeah,
We tried to get funding for that site for phase 2.
yes.
We did not achieve that. That's why there's like a gap in the fiscal years where we did this project. So for the third one, we went over to this site where we thought we'd get funding, more likely to get funding through the grant program, and we did.
Yeah. We were trying to bite off more
So
than
now the
we could chew.
DPW's, aside from that, looking into, with our budget money, our operating budget money, resolving, at least designing a resolution to that problem when we get to hopefully do the design with our funding, and then we can take that and seek grant funding through the MVP program.
Or coastal remedial pollutant.
Coastal pollutant remediation.
Thank you, coastal pollutant
So
remediation.
right now,
right,
we're
there's
trying
other
to push
grants.
it to a point where we can then go back and seek grant funding to take it to final design or construction. So we're not, instead of just letting it sit and wait and say, we'll apply for grant funding to design that, we're trying to do the design in-house with the town's money
Well, that's good.
to keep it moving, and then go back to grant funding for construction, knowing that
Kind of
it's
walk
gonna be
away,
pretty.
I have the sense that there's not a sense of urgency about any of these projects. Am I wrong about that?
I don't, it's more
Is
a
that
money and time
miscalculated?
thing than it is urgency. There's only so much money in the town's budget and grant money available, and so much of our time to match it. It's
Yeah.
not that we want it to take this long, it is the process, unfortunately. I mean, if we had more money, we could call a company to design us that as fast as possible, and then put out a bid for the several $100,000 it probably is at minimum to fix it.
I mean,
But we don't have that in our, in our operating
Yeah,
budget.
I think
so.
that this, if I'm trying to remember what our grant was, I think it was in the realm of $86,000 for this phase that I'm talking about, which is the final design and permitting, and that's a lot of money, and I certainly didn't have that in the Conservation Commission's budget. Frank didn't have that in his budget either. So we're trying to walk that line between moving forward, continuing to move forward in a deliberative way, but also being respectful of only so many hours in the day for us to spend on it, and only so many dollars in our budgets. All right, so next steps, this grant that we're working on now, that this meeting is about, ends on June 30th. Our design plans are completed and all permits, environmental permits will be applied for. But again, there's that lag time to get the permits. We're going to seek additional support from CZM for phase 3, applying for a grant this time next year to implement the work. We will always be committed to continuing the public education and outreach, trying to get the word out there. So any other questions for me about this project? All right, so I'll turn it over to Frank. I'll do the presentation.
Thanks. So again, Frank Ventimiglia, DPW, working through the same grant program that Alicia's grant was through over on County Road and the Riverwalk. So our grant is, behind hers. This phase was again identified through the trustees' vulnerability assessment that they did, identifies the road. We teamed up with them and put in a grant to complete a 30% design to look at the flooding effects of the sea level rise and the just normal storms and how that affects the current condition and what that might look like in the future. The 30% design is not all inclusive. They looked at the tide data, they modeled that tide data and look at how that was, did it meet with what they were expecting when they ran the initial assessment and fine-tune a little bit of that. They did a survey of the entire stretch of road, identified the wetlands, flagged the wetlands, and that tells us where we kind of can and can't work within and what we can do. And that information will be used moving forward as we further, obviously, the design along. We will work off this base plan that we created. One of the major components of our project was looking at the culvert that crosses underneath Gilla Road right before you hit the beach. That was replaced in 2000, and we wanted to still look at it to see if it was sized correctly for the current flow conditions that we're seeing out there. And certainly with their modeling data, it didn't seem like it, so it was obvious to at least look at it. It turns out that the structure was slightly undersized that's out there today. Maybe it was sized right in 2000, depending on what the flow changes have been with sea level rise. But it did recommend increasing that structure. I think the existing one is 5 by 8, and we're proposing an 8 by 10. So it will, if the project does move forward, you would see that box culvert get increased, just to try to get a more complete tidal range upstream to the other side of Gilla Road. So the goals of the project, again, we're looking to design a more resilient roadway using green infrastructure, seeing if within that we can raise the road to make the road more resilient to flooding, and what the impacts of the adjacent salt marsh are as we now analyze what we're talking about. The key conditions out there, as we talked about and know, is that the road floods regularly, at least a couple times a month, and you'll see that with some of the tide data that we collected at the location. The tricky part of this project is it's surrounded by salt marsh on either side, and salt marsh is one of the most protected wetland resource areas. So to raise the road, how do we raise the road without going into the salt marsh that in this instance is literally 5 feet off the road or less in almost every spot. So we're going to try to work and match the existing footprint, maintain the utilities on the one side where you see the telephone poles, and then consider how do we raise that road without stopping everyone from going to the beach for 2 years while it's being done. So that's another tricky component of this project, is maintaining access almost the entire time while we're doing the construction. So it's going to make the construction a longer process. And the only time you probably do see a closure is when we're doing the culvert replacement when we get to that point. Obviously to replace the culvert, we got to rip the old one out, and there'll be a short period of no access for vehicles at that time. So this is just looking at kind of the standard, if we had no salt marsh and we were going to raise a road, and right here is the existing road elevation. So if we were going to raise that a few feet, this is how you would normally achieve that. You build up your side slopes, they'd go further out into off your shoulder of the road. And that's what would give you the stability to put this road another few feet higher. Knowing we don't have that in our, what we have out there for wetlands, then we start to analyze some of the other treatments that can be used to achieve raising your road. We looked at several options. Again, this is option A that looks very similar to what we just looked at. This doesn't go out quite as far into the wetland, and we vegetate that slope with a coarse woody material that can absorb some of the wave action energy from the ocean. Tom was saying if we just put a seawall here, the energy comes in, goes right back into the ocean and starts scouring and damaging the ACEC salt marsh, which in the long term has much worse of an effect on the salt marsh than an option like this. These are some of the other ways that we looked at possibly achieving raising the road. This would be like a terrace type approach. Those are the core fiber logs that Alicia mentioned on her project that would be used to retain some slope. And then we could vegetate these areas with salt marsh, and as the sea level rises, maybe the salt marsh will move up this embankment with it. Meeting with DEP as part of this project, we came out of that meeting with, well, it'd be nice to increase the salt marsh in these areas. What's the how vital is that? And they're feeling it's not as vital as possibly replicating or creating salt marsh on site, but just not on the embankment of the road, knowing that, again, that this is likely to have wave action ice chunks that you'll see that wash on this road regularly in a winter storm that would come crashing into here and could disrupt this. So they were looking, that's fine, go ahead, because we'll get back to that. So some of the steps that we're taking, again, during this project would be, we've completed the wetland survey, completed the tide data. So from here we would be, and we have submitted to continue our grant. So again, this was a 30% design. We've submitted to the grant to take this to close to final design and permit submittal similar to Alicia's. Agree with a side slope treatment with DEP that they feel can be permitted, and then design that to 90% and submit all of our permits to all the regulatory agencies that will have a chance to review and comment on the project. So if we get the funding for that, this will continue this year. If we don't get the funding for that, this probably gets shelved for a year while we do the same thing we were talking about. The other sites, does the town have the money within its operating budget to further this design, in hopes that we'll get construction funding through future grant money. None of that I can speak to whether we will or won't do that, but this budget is much larger than what Alicia just mentioned to design, and we couldn't afford to push hers forward without the grant funding. So I suspect unless the town did some capital borrowing, this project kind of waits until we can get some grant funding to help the design move along. The trustees are continuing to partner with us. They're a partner on this phase of the grant. They actually did a cash in kind match for the town's match, 25% match on Alicia's. We achieved that with all in kind hours that we were spending on it. In this instance, because the trustees are aware that it services them just as much as us, they felt, and it's a high priority for them, that they found the money through their budget to pay for the, I think it was almost $40,000 for the 25% match for the town. They don't have the money this time around, so we are using our hours as in-kind hours, and the town will supplement the remaining money if we need to with the DPW's operating budget for this fiscal year. The biggest part of why this is an important project is the location. The location is through a salt marsh. If you go to beaches outside of Ipswich, you probably drive half of them through a salt marsh to get there. And the goal of this project is to work with the regulators, the DEPs of the world, to come up with a side slope treatment that they feel is least impactful to the salt marsh and still achieves being able to raise a road, to get some additional years out of it without constant flooding and maintenance that's going to be needed. Any particular questions? Yes, sir.
Are you confident that you'll be able to reach agreement with DEP on the side slope issue?
Yes, we had a very productive meeting with them probably a couple months ago, a month and a half ago. We didn't walk out of there with a go down this, here's the path to go, but it was a good back and forth. I do feel like they gave us some pointers to go back and work on. We've been working on them, so we do feel confident that we will come up to an agreement with them on what, the ideal side slope treatment would be to get something like this accomplished. Yes, sir.
What is the distance of the actual road rating? Does it go back to the hill, or is it just that short stretch?
It goes on pretty much at the trustees entrance, just if you come down off of that, so it doesn't go all the way back. I know you go up a hill and there's a few houses, it does not go all the way back to that hill. But this is where we see the flooding. They see some flooding in here, it tops the road and it'll go in there. We obviously see the predominantly here, but as you come up here, you don't see the flooding up there as much. Whatever level we raise this road, we would tie into where we meet that. We're only talking 1.5 feet, 2 feet tops, I would think, in here if we're lucky. So if you can envision when you're driving out of there, when you leave this elevation where 2 feet it is down here, that's about where the project ends. And it's, just beyond or just town side of the main entrance to the trustees. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Frank, this project is designed, or will be designed to prevent flooding to some point in the future. What is that date?
So we're hoping 2070 with the data they have. So the data they have, it looked at what the flooding looks like at 2030 and at 2070. And again, we're not stopping all flooding here. We're looking at stopping, and there's not a good image here, but I'll find it, the regular flooding, the monthly,
The daily.
the high tide flooding. By 2070, it's projected that each high tide cycle tops that road if it stays at the elevation it is. So we're hoping to get it high enough that the regular high tide doesn't flood the road. Storm surge will still flood the road. This road, Jeffrey's Neck Road, no road that we build around here is, I don't think we can build to stop storm surge unless we start building bridges on these roads.
But we're upgrading it to be more resilient to those storms.
So again, so a lot of those side slope treatments that aren't there today will hopefully lessen the impact, the energy that's hitting the road, the damage to the road.
Another quick question.
Yes.
Cost?
For the construction,
Yeah, what's this project going to cost?
have you guys thrown a number at cost yet?
Depending on alternative.
Yeah, it depends on the side slope, but probably close to $2 million. I mean, that's what I would estimate, 1.5 to 2 million if I had to guess, if I was guessing. That's what we're spending on Jeffrey's Neck. This is a similar length of road to what we're doing out there. It's completely different side slope and option. Out there you have a wider footprint, so we can play within the existing footprint a little more than we can on Ardula Road. So, and that's what I think will end up equaling out the cost, even though we can do it differently on Jeffrey's Neck Road. This process is going to be the same, probably, if not more labor to get done than what you'll see out on Jeffrey's Neck Road. It's, I think, a little easier to build that one up than it will be to build this one up. Yes.
Have you looked at a bridge type structure that would be maybe, anchored in the ground, not a true bridge?
It was it is something that they looked at both here in Jeffrey's Neck Road. Something that you kind of have to look at as an option when you start doing these permitting matrices, to see that you've looked at every option, the do nothing option and the build a bridge option. The build a bridge option usually gets priced out of being what's feasible. And in this scenario, it's, if you build the bridge, where is the bridge deck? And when you look at it, the bridge deck is not far off of the existing road, so then it becomes, are we improving anything here? There's no vegetation that's ever going to survive under a low-lying bridge deck. So from a permitting aspect, we're not achieving a ton by doing a bridge from from restoring a wetland. If we could raise the road high enough that you could get, free-flowing and migrating salt marsh completely under it, yes, it might be worth it. The other problem with the bridge here is where do the transition back into the parking lot that's not going to get raised. And obviously here is easier because you're coming down a hill, but this is really, and that's what, even with Jeffrey's Neck Road, when we look at raising the road, how far can you raise it before you cut the 3 houses or 4 houses between Eagle Hill and like Island Park off from access to the road completely? And that's something that has to be looked at. And so that's why that option beyond price is not really viable out there as well. So it is something that we do look at through all of these, is at least what the cost is and what the impacts are at that level. So for more information on both of these projects, this is a link to information on Alicia's website, And then this is a link to part of our project, created a story map, which was that last slide. I'm gonna flip through it real quick. It really is just a website. And I'm gonna just flip through it real quick just to show you how to navigate it, because it's pretty much like a web browser, but it's slightly different as far as going from the page to page within it.
So CZM has put together some really helpful fact sheets. If you go to their website, you can see all of Trump's properties fact sheets. I've printed out a limited number of copies of one that I thought would be most apropos. Please feel free to take these with you. Controlling overland runoff to reduce coastal erosion. So this kind of gets to your problem. How to keep that water from getting down there so fast. We also have other handouts. We have Greenscapes, which is our stormwater collaborative that we belong to. There's a brochure about rain gardens. There's a brochure that we created as part of this grant for enjoying, restoring, and protecting Ipswich's coastal resource areas. And then I have just the cover page of a resilience guide for Ipswich that the Cape Ann Business Association put together, and it's got the website with the link so you can go and download that one on your own. But I want to thank you all for coming, and special thanks to CZM, whose funding made both of these projects and this presentation possible.
And I'm just going to flip through
yeah.
real quick the story map site, just so you know what I'll see if Tom, you want to walk them through it now. I can yell, I can talk loud from here, but. So when you get to the story map, so if you click the link, this is the page that you would come up to. Before I even go any further, I want to give Carol McCauley and Christine
Boynton, two trustees.
Full credit, they work for the trustees, they did an amazing job, and I can only imagine the number of hours they spent putting this together. It would take me probably a lifetime. So, to get the little overview, you would click these arrows throughout, and they just bring up a page. You can also navigate it on this little bar here, but some windows don't have this bar that I have, some navigating windows. So then if you click on these tabs up top, it walks you through kind of the beginning to the end, you know, where we started, little verbiage on each, and then you on this side would just, every time you click, it'll bring you to a new window of information. That's a photo from last March, one of those nor'easters that we had. January, sorry. And that's a common occurrence down there. I know after every storm, we get the call from the police to go down there and push all the ice off with the loader. So that's almost every time it's flooded in the winter, it looks like
That's
that.
a slider. You can show that how it changes over time. Just grab the slider. It will show you. You get it shifted across. To show you how the road is 2030, and then how the road will look in 2070 at the mean high water mark.
So do you see how that's shifting? Which is pretty nice feature. And again, each one of these has a little verbiage on the left there that gives you a little more detail to what you're looking at.
I think another nice feature of this project too is it actually will allow the marsh to expand over time, migrate. So we actually get more marsh than we would have, because the culvert's been a bit of a tidal restriction over time, so it will hopefully expand the marsh. And we're trying to actually restore the marsh as well, make it more resilient to sea level rise. So it's a kind of a complementary project to what the trustees are trying to do to restore the marshes in that location in the future.
Did you say that the current culvert was put in 2000?
In 2000, and they didn't. Eric Hutchins from NOAA was at least involved in that. I don't know who was the lead on it.
Yeah.
I don't believe they had any tide data at the time that they were really going off of. Not certainly not to the extent we do. And again, it seemed when the Woods Hole group checked it, it seemed sized pretty close. So.
Yeah.
I
was just like
before
make
that
the
culvert, it was, I think,
observation
18.
that like this whole arena of work has just totally changed in the last 20 years. The amount of science that's informing all this, you know, the amount of really good data, the number of partners, and that's, you know, what do you hope the life of a culvert is? 30 years, you know, and, you know, trying to build out a generation to 2070, but these projects are really big and really expensive, and I would echo that the work that a community like Ipswich is doing is really important, not just for Ipswich, but for, you know, to be a model to other communities. And I know there are residents in the room from other towns, which is awesome. So, and I don't know, Tom or Catherine, you know, when you work statewide and our contractors too, I just think it's going to be really important to continue to share what we're learning. You know, Argilla Road, Jeffreys Neck Road, Plum Island Turnpike, there's so many, you know, Essex Causeway, not just in our region, but statewide. So.
This graphic is what shows, this is the tide data right here. So this is your fluctuating tides. Upstream, there's a small weir still in place that actually limits the low tide from ever leaving completely. So that's why you see this, you know, not so, a very consistent low tide. This black line is the road elevation. So you can see in the 1 month that we collected this data, it got topped 3 times in September, and this is in September or October of last year. I don't believe there was no storm influence there, that was just regular. I think there was a moon tide or a king tide at that time, but those, you know, you can see how close it's coming on some of these other tides as you get to the probably the full moon tide cycle. And that's in the response where we're gathering the data, part of what they're doing there. One of these has all the...
That's the 7.
Sorry, yeah, I just skipped around. This one, it actually has all the 5 original, I guess, side slope treatments that we looked at. And of that 5, we brought, I think, 3 to DEP, and leaving DEP, we got charged with making a few more to fill the gaps of the discussion. So, but if you click on these links, because it's tough to see in there, it'll bring up an individual of each side slope image.
So as we work with the town of Ipswich, we're going to update this site constantly with new information as we move through the project. So it'll be something you can come back to from time to time and learn more about the project as it moves along.
So if you do hear that we get the grant funding, I would, and this is, you know, this is a good way to keep up, like Tom just said, with what's new, because as information is becoming approved by CCM in the town, it will get uploaded to the site and fit in. So that's just a quick overview of that. Again, I think it's different. I think it's a great way to get the information out there, and I'm thrilled that the trustees were able to pull this together. And I think that concludes the public meeting, unless there's any questions that came up in the meantime. Thank you again all for coming.